Hello, I'm Charlotte. I'm here from Press Gazette with Dorothy Byrne, editor-at-large at Channel 4. Hi, Dorothy.
Hello, great to be with you.
Thank you for joining us. So I will launch in. We're talking several months after you did the McTaggart lecture at the Edinburgh TV Festival last year. I wondered if I could just ask there was a huge response to it, a huge reaction. Were you expecting that? Did any of the response to that surprise you? And also, were you nervous about any of the things that you were planning to say?
I wasn't nervous, but I was really overwhelmed by the response. Actually, particularly from women. I had lots of women write to me and come up to me and say that it was fantastic that while people in the film industry had talked about sexual harassment and assault, this was the first time they felt that a really major public platform had been given to the issue. I talked about my past and things that had happened to me. And the thing that has really shocked me is that a number of young women have told me that this is happening to them now. And that in some ways it's worse because I had a staff job, but a lot of these young women are freelance, and therefore when the boss makes an approach to them and harasses them or, in some other way behaves inappropriately, they really feel that their job could be on the line if they reject him too aggressively. And it's made me think that as an industry, we've got to talk about this much more, and maybe broadcasters should get together and try to come up with some sort of code of conduct about harassment at work and discrimination, and maybe ask companies we work with to sign up to it. I don't know, but that shocked me a lot. At the time I gave the McTaggart, I said that I felt that journalists don't speak up for themselves enough, and that we had listened for too long to people calling us the mainstream media or talking about fake news. And I still really feel that. And I think that the coverage of COVID-19 by, across all media and, right-wing and left-wing press and in between has been absolutely outstanding. And it's been journalists who have gone out in this country and discovered what is really happening. It's been journalists as a group who really uncovered what was happening about PPE, what was happening in care homes. And I feel that journalists in this time have played the most fantastic public service role. And we can see in TV how people have appreciated it. The trust levels for BBC and Channel 4 are now 83%, ITV 82%, I think Sky, when I last looked, it was 75%. So the public has really trusted us, and we've done the most terrific job, and we should, keep saying how important journalists are and not let people put us down.
There's so many fantastic things in there. That's really great. Obviously it's amazing to hear you highlighting the good work that's going on at the moment. Do you think there's enough support coming from either from the government or anyone else who might need to support journalists doing their work at the moment, who, you know, is that sort of being supported or hindered from what you're saying?
Well, I'm like most journalists, I think, particularly concerned about regional and local journalists. Again and again in this crisis, it's been information that we've got from local areas which has informed the national debate. And, you know, when I worked first as a journalist, I was actually the health correspondent for a group of local weekly papers in East London and Essex. And we really need journalists with local knowledge, with in-depth knowledge of what's happening in their hospitals and care homes to be informing us now. And I feel very concerned when I read about what is happening to local papers. And I think that the government needs to think imaginatively about how we ensure that local and regional papers survive this crisis. Channel 4 has taken a financial hit, but whatever happens, I feel confident that we will always have the money to make high quality investigative and revelatory journalism. That will be the number one priority of the channel.
That is very good and reassuring to hear. And thinking about sort of broadcast news and access as well in coronavirus, I wondered what you're thinking about the press briefings and how they're being run, and sort of the introduction of public questions. Do you think they're being done in a good way, or is there more that you think we should be getting from that?
Well, the first thing is, I think it's very interesting that the most important event in the day in our political life is those press briefings. If you remember, before this crisis, some people were saying that it was no longer necessary or important for politicians to appear on the so-called mainstream media. Of course, we are called the mainstream media because everybody watches us. Mainstream is a good word, not a bad word. But what we have in fact seen now is that as soon as the government needed to get its message across to the people of Britain, the most important way it did it was by appearing on television. In my MacTaggart, I complained about politicians just giving sound bites and not doing lengthy interviews and not answering a lot of questions. And I said that, I hate to quote myself, but I will, that if politicians want the people to trust them, they have to appear on TV at length and answer a lot of questions. And lo and behold, the government has realized that if it wants the public to trust it, the leading politicians must appear on television and subject themselves to scrutiny. There are tough and challenging questions asked at those press conferences, and different journalists ask different questions from different angles. And I think it's because the public have seen that scrutiny and seen that it comes from different places, the Daily Mail, Channel 4 News, Sky News, the Daily Mirror, that they have trusted what they have heard, and they don't feel this is just the government telling us what to think and expecting us just to believe it. The government have held themselves up to scrutiny, and as a result of that, what we have seen is that the British people have gone, right, we get you, we believe you, we will stay at home on lockdown. You know, we might have misgivings about various parts of policy, but in general terms, the British people have trusted that this is the right thing for our country to be doing now. And that has been very much because they've heard journalists asking those tough questions. I've heard some people say journalists shouldn't ask tough and challenging questions at this time. The opposite is true. If you want people to trust you, you must be seen to be being scrutinized in a tough way. Otherwise, a lot of the people would think, well, they're just getting away with that. That isn't really true.
What do you think is going to be the most important thing going forward, like as soon as the worst is over? Do you think there's a risk the government could go back to less scrutiny, or how do you think this sort of good trend needs to continue?
Well, I hope that all politicians of all hues have seen the enormous benefit of re-engaging with the public, speaking at length, answering different questions. So I genuinely hope that this is a new beginning for politicians and journalists to work together for the benefit of our democracy. The other issue that we need to be dealt with when this is all over is protecting local and regional and national newspapers, and being sure that these papers continue to exist after such a difficult financial time.
Definitely.
And I think we really need to think about that. We also need to think about some of the rubbish that there has been on the internet. It's interesting that people haven't believed it as much as one might have expected. But Reuters did an interesting survey that showed a high percentage of people had heard a load of rubbish on the internet, you know, and we really need to try to get a grip on that and find some way of the public being able to tell apart trustworthy sources of news on the internet and untrustworthy sources of news.
That's interesting, because ITN this week sort of published their submission to the House of Lords Future of Journalism inquiry, and saying that social platforms that don't adhere to a code of conduct about that type of content, and so-called fake news, etc., should face sanctions as serious as broadcasters. Do you agree with that? Is that the sort of path you'd like to see go down?
I don't think it's for me to say exactly what should be done, but we can't just drift along like this with absolute nonsense being purveyed on the internet with no comeback at all. We've got this problem now that we're living in, but remember, before there was another problem, which was people not taking the MMR vaccine because of absolute gibberish talked on the internet about it. And that put the lives and good health of millions of children at risk. We're soon, we hope, going to have the beginnings of thinking about a vaccine for this condition, COVID-19. Now, I don't know if there will be a vaccine or if there will not be a vaccine, but out there in the ether, we must not forget there are ludicrous anti-vaxxers, and they're there, and they will come onto the internet talking rubbish, and we need to all be ready for that, and the government needs to be ready for that, because there could be very serious consequences if these people are allowed to talk the normal drivel that they talk.
Agreed. So we've covered sort of the last couple of months and the COVID-19 crisis. I wonder if we could just rewind slightly to the December election, because you talked in your lecture obviously about fears about the scrutiny that we see from politicians, and so we did end up seeing obviously an ice sculpture on Channel 4, because that's where it got to. I wondered if just overall it was about what you predicted, or sort of what you were thinking in terms of how the politicians acted in terms of their scrutiny with journalists during that election.
Well, I think that we had some very good things in the election. Particularly, it was great that there were quite a number of television debates. That was very good to see. I think we would have liked to see all the leaders on all the debates. I was very sorry that two of the leaders didn't come to our climate debate. But I think we can see that those debates were successful. I've written an analysis of them for a research paper, and actually they covered a wide range of subjects and policies and really help people. So I think we should build on that success. And I think for the next election, let's look forward. Politicians should look at what they can learn from what's happening now, and see that going forward, in general, but in the next election, they should put themselves up for proper lengthy scrutiny. And I hope that they can see that if they do that, they are judged fairly by the people.
Yes, hope so. And also in terms of specifically with Channel 4 and sort of the turbulent relationship that the channel had with the Conservative Party, I wondered sort of what your views on that were, and where any of it died on their end, or yeah.
Do you know, a lot of that was, if you looked at what was in newspapers, it was unquoted so-called sources. Honestly, a lot of that was drummed up by certain media. And, you know, we have seen politicians in this time come on Channel 4 and Channel 4 News regularly. So you know, we're a public service broadcaster doing fantastic work at the moment, and I think that that has been appreciated by government sources as well as the news. We've done fantastic programs, you know, how to survive in isolation, what to do if you get COVID-19, how to clean your house. But also the government has congratulated us on other programming that we have done that has in fact helped people to enjoy staying at home. You know, Jamie showing you how to cook, the lovely Grayson program, getting the public to rediscover their love of art. And especially, I have to mention, because I began my career with them in TV, Richard and Judy's Book Show, which is just an absolute delight, you know. So I think we've done great public service, and you know, and government sources have been open in saying how much they appreciated that.
That's good to hear. I wondered, now that you've sort of just left your role as head of news and current affairs after, was it 20 years?
Well, 17 years, 6 months, I think it was.
Good to be precise. And so I wondered if, I don't know how easy this is, but if you would be able to share sort of your top 5 proudest achievements, whether they are stories or other things that you've accomplished through Channel 4.
Oh, wow. Well, I always have to be careful about naming particular stories, because then people get upset that I didn't name their story. But I feel that I inherited from my predecessor, David Lloyd, a channel that was famous for revelatory investigation and for daring to say the unsayable. And I feel really proud that Channel 4 news and current affairs are, you know, absolutely famous for investigation, be it, you know, revealing the Attorney General's letter, or Cambridge Analytica, or some of the fantastic journalism that Victoria MacDonald is doing now. So I think investigation, I think, you know, daring to talk about things that other people find difficult and wouldn't talk about, you know, a lot of the time in this country there are issues surrounding the predicaments of people from ethnic minorities that are not discussed, and I think we've dared to discuss those. I think we are cheeky, you know. One of my favorite things was setting up my own Guantanamo. When we couldn't get into Guantanamo, I set my own up in a factory in East London, and we tortured people. So, you know, I really like that. I think in the time that I've been here, you know, more women, and it's notable that the latest survey from City University of the percentage of women experts that are appearing said that actually it hasn't slipped back on Channel 4, although it has at I think all other broadcasters, or most other broadcasters. And that's in a time when it's very difficult, because almost every day they come out for that press conference and it's 3 white blokes. And all the time I thought that life was changing. No, it wasn't, because it turns out when they brought them all out from their scientific departments and political desks, they were nearly all white blokes, just the way they used to be when I was a child. So that's been a bit of a shocker to us all, hasn't it? And then I think the other thing is that when I started out in journalism, you know, the ultimate journalist that you thought of was the foreign correspondent, who was, you know, you couldn't know what was happening in another country if some tall white bloke didn't go there to tell you. And now, I don't mean any offense to tall white blokes, they're all marvelous, but now we realize we didn't just need tall white blokes to tell us what was happening in a country. And in Syria, for example, the person who told us more about what life was like in Syria than anyone else was actually a small Syrian woman, Wad, in her fantastic film For Sama. And I think we have completely transformed the nature of who gets to tell the story, and that transforms what the story is that you get to hear.
Yeah, I thought for summer was incredible as well. Yeah. And so sort of looking forward again, what are the main couple of issues that you think still need working on in the journalism industry and maybe at Channel 4 in particular as well?
Well, I think that going into this very difficult financial time, one of my roles will be to help and support everybody in maintaining the ethos of our channel, which is revelatory, investigative, challenging journalism that tells you about people and places which no other broadcaster would. And, you know, that will be key that for me to, in my at-large role, to just really support people in what will be a difficult time. But I also have a very specific role as well that I've taken on, which is to improve the sustainability of our environmental sustainability of our program making. And in that regard, actually, we've learned an enormous amount during COVID-19, haven't we? That I can really build on, and that's a positive of our time. So, you know, you and I didn't have to use up the world's energy meeting each other to do this interview, although it would be very nice to meet you sometime. I don't mean we should never meet each other again, but we've learned that we don't all need to traipse into the office 5 days a week, all getting on the train at exactly the same time. I mean, we can't do that anymore for a considerable period of time, but actually we've realized we didn't need to do it anyway. Maybe we only need to go to the office 2 or 3 days a week. You know, very small things like, you know, my printer doesn't work very well here, so I'm just not really printing anything. Well, maybe I never needed to print anything. Do we really need to send, we couldn't send film crews, say, to the US or to South Korea or to Italy. We literally couldn't do that. So we've always worked a lot with freelance journalists in other countries, but now we're working with them even more. And some of the very best films that Channel 4 has shown have been filmed by these marvelous journalists in other countries who we have discovered were there all the time. And think how that will help the planet if journalists don't feel they have to fly to the place to see it. So I want to help Channel 4 come up with a plan to build on what we're doing now to make our channels significantly more environmentally friendly. Because if we think COVID-19 is bad, and it is, it's terrible, the potential effects of climate change are even worse. So rather than us shutting issues of climate change out because we're so worried about this, they actually should be much more to the fore than they were previously. And I feel absolutely dedicated to this. And I've asked every department in Channel 4 commissioning to come up with their plan and their idea of what they are going to do to make us a more environmentally friendly company.
That sounds fantastic and really positive.
It is, it is.
So some programs might look a little bit different, but not in a bad way, just like, and we'll know that it's for a really positive reason.
Yes, and we've all got used to I mean, I don't mean we just want to see people sitting in their living room. Although it has been interesting to see some people's rooms, and I do find myself with my head sideways trying to zoom in on what their books are. Krishnan Guru Murthy has a very strange sculpture on his mantelpiece, and I'm not sure what it is, but it bears an uncanny resemblance to an elephant turd. So I think we do need to move on from just seeing people in their living room, but we cannot, I mean, financially we can't do it, but we should not go back to the way we lived before. I can hear birds in my garden. I was standing on Highgate Hill and I looked down and I could see St. Paul's. You know, these are wonderful things that we don't want to lose.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So it'll be interesting to see what changes we come up with. Well, thank you so much, Dorothy.
Well, thank you. It's been lovely talking to you.
You too. Thank you.
And we will meet one day. Meeting will be allowed, even if we have to walk everywhere.
Yes, well, that would be quite nice, actually.
Yes.
In the middle somewhere in London.
Yes, we shouldn't be in such a rush to get to places. Just take longer to get there.
Yeah, it'd be lovely.
And we can think along the way and read poetry inside our heads or write it. You know, our lives, for those of us who survive, could be better. And in many ways, we owe it to all the people who've suffered to try to bring some goodness out of this.
That's a lovely message to end on. So thank you again. Thank you so much, Dorothy.
Thank you.
It was really nice to meet you.
And you. Bye-bye.
Bye.